Okay, so being that we've read Marx and we're discussing whether poverty is a result of laziness, poor decision making, or moral deficiency, and we're looking through this through a Marxist lens. I believe Marx would argue against all three of those, and he would disagree that none of those are the innate reason for poverty. I think that he would recognize the truth behind it, that there are in every society people that those three things, moral deficiency, poor decision making, and laziness, they do play an aspect, they do play a factor, but it is not the main reason. There are lazy people that just don't want to work, people that have made poor decisions in life, and that moral deficiency, it does inherently add to poverty in a society, but that would not be the driving factor. It is not a result of those. Poverty is a result of capitalism. If we're looking at this through a Marxist lens, and he answers this in his readings, in his writings. Marx's question, what he was trying to understand in his writings was why, as a society, we are the wealthiest, however, have such a great amount of poverty. So how can we have all this money, all this wealth, yet have the highest rate of poverty? And to do that, we have to understand capitalism. So I kind of have a short definition here. Capitalism is an economic system where private individuals or businesses own and control property and resources instead of the government. Market forces like supply and demand determine what goods and services are produced, how they are produced, and at what prices they are sold. The goal in capitalism is to often make a profit, and competition is encouraged to drive innovation and efficiency. So what Marx argues is that inherently, when you have a capitalist society, labor leads to alienation because workers are exploited for their labor, and they are. It almost limits their ability to escape their poverty, right? So you could have a worker that's consistently working. They're doing their 40 hours a week on their minimum wage pay, and they're not getting out of this poverty because after all their regularly monthly bills, they're still left broke. However, people that are owning these properties through something that Marx calls primitive accumulation, right? Through these big corporations that they own, they are capitalizing off the backs of these people doing that labor, and that is kind of how that labor leads to alienation. And capitalism in itself, it generates inequalities because it is a commodity, and it's what's ever popping, it's whatever is hot at the time. So if we were to before we tackle this down, I would like to recognize that Marx doesn't say capitalism is a bad thing. He may blame it for being the root of poverty, but he didn't say that's a bad thing. And in fact, he says the bourgeois, during its rule of scarce 100 years, has created more massive and more colossal productive forces than all preceding generations together. Subjection of nature's forces to man, machinery, application of chemistry to industry and agriculture, steam navigation, railways, electric telegraphs, clearing a whole continents for cultivation. Canalization, no, yeah, canalization. I'm going with that. Of rivers, yeah, canalization of rivers. Whole populations conjured out of the ground. What earlier century had even a presentiment that such productive forces slumbered in the lap of social labor? And here he was referring to the capitalism here. So it doesn't say it's necessarily a bad thing. He would just say that it is the reason. So just to tackle each and every single one of these, laziness. Saying people are lazy, it overlooks the structure that factories plays, especially making in simple terms just a minimum wage. I kind of explained it earlier when I said you're working those 40-hour weeks making minimum wage, you're not making enough money. It overlooks the moralistic compass. Just because they're not making as much as them doesn't mean they deserve to be in poverty. They could be working just as hard. In fact, some could argue they're working even harder. However, they're not making as much, right? Because they're living in a capitalist society. Poor decision making. Yes. This also goes to the systematic issues with. Sorry, I have everything. It's just unorganized. Poor decision making. It doesn't qualify for the systematic issues with unemployment, low wages, and the lack of access to certain resources. And then you have your moral deficiencies, which doesn't address the structural inequalities. So when you're looking at it from a Marxist perspective, in a way, capitalism it creates a certain structure that kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? It gives a reason for poverty to stay in place, right? And I think your biggest examples are with minimum wage, and then you have things like technology and machinery taking over. And he says, owing to the extensive use of machinery and to the division of labor, the work of the proletarians has lost all individual character and consequently all charm for the workman. He becomes an appendage of the machine, and it is only the most simple, most autonomous, and most easily acquired knack that is required of him. Hence, the cost of production of a workman is restricted almost entirely to the means of subsistence that he requires for maintenance and for the propagation of his race. But the price of commodity, and therefore also of labor, is equal to its cost of production. In proportion, therefore, as the repulsiveness of the work increases, the wage decreases. Nay more, in proportion as the use of machinery and division of labor increases, in the same proportion the burden of toil also increases, whether by prolongation of the working hours, by the increase of the work exacted in a given time, or by increased speed of machinery, etc. So capitalism is favoring this exchange value of whatever's popping at the time, and as you have, advancing technologies, you can't get things done, and it limits the ability for people to have these jobs. So if you're looking at this from a Marxist perspective, capitalism would be the reason. And as someone who is, in this forum, who's having this conversation, I inherently would agree, and I would say that Marx's views were enlightening because it does highlight these issues. And what he did was he kind of called him out, right? He recognized that there are people that are kind of filling that spot. There's enough people for everyone to agree with it. There are enough lazy people for laziness to be a reason. There's enough people making poor decisions for it to be considered a reason. However, he's not highlighting the systematic downfall and the traps that are put there to limit these people's abilities. So yeah, that's how I'd answer that question.